All right, we're back again with David Hall. David, are you re-hooked up yet?
I believe I am.
So if you can bring up that language for us to look at while we got you,
Yes.
while we have you.
Okay. Right here. Okay, so again, for your record, David Hall, Legislative Council, what I've pulled up on your screen now is S-79 as passed by House and Senate and as vetoed. I do not have the record for the number of bills vetoed in the last few years, but I could be close. This is one of them.
We were
A lot.
in a chairs committee, we were debating this issue last year. And it was almost I think it was a tie at the time between us and Fish and Wildlife for 50 purposes. So yeah.
So this has a similar construct, but the version of the bill we looked at this morning is a little more simplified. This has some more nuance, especially when it comes to what is exempt from registration, et cetera. But you'll see, it's got the same 2478, 2479 construct. It's still charged to DHCD working with all these others. Long-term and short-term rentals. It's the same list of the 9 data points, which is, very much aligned. Based on the data that's currently available through tax. It still has the onus on municipalities and their local programs, if they operate them, to provide the data at least annually to the department. I want to pause on subsection D here because this language was developed over the course of this session, and it relates to what are you allowed and not allowed to do with the data on the registry, right? So under D1, the data the department collects pursuant to this section is exempt from public inspection and copying pursuant to 1 VSA 317C1, that's Public Records Act provision. And the department shall not disclose such data except as provided in subdivision 2 of this subsection. So the department may disclose data it collects pursuant to this section to other state, municipal, or regional government entities, to nonprofit organizations, or to other persons for the purposes of protecting public health and safety. It shall not disclose data it collects pursuant to this section for a commercial purpose. And under C, it shall require as a condition of receiving data collected pursuant to this section that a person to whom the department disclosed the data has to take necessary steps to protect the privacy of persons whom the data concerns, to protect the data from further disclosure, and to comply with subdivision B, so not a commercial purpose. So, in the end, it's all coming back to me now. This was a different committee. There were different people on this committee. There were different people in the Senate, and there were different concerns about what you could do with this data, where it should be allowed to go. And so in the end, this language, as with most things in the process, is a compromise. I would flag a few points here. We never really decided what it means, that a purpose of protecting public health and safety. To me, that was always a very limited authority for the use of this data. While I don't know what it means, I'm not sure that it includes things like, municipal or regional planning. Certainly it would include maybe emergencies, but even in an emergency, is that really necessary to protect public health and safety? I don't know. So I think it's, again, as I said, not half an hour ago, one of your decision points is, once you have this data, what are you going to use it for? And because this, if you make it too narrow, then what really is the point? And I would also say that, again, because these 9 data points largely, it's nearly identical to what's already required to be provided and then made publicly available through the Department of Taxes. I mean, so much of this is already available on that searchable spreadsheet that tax makes public every Halloween, or has to be compiled and available as of Halloween. So, it seems odd that it's so readily available from tax, but so less readily available, arguably, from the department. I'm not sure that makes much sense. So anyway, any questions on subsection D? Again, for the millionth time, I'm not advocating for any position one way or the other. I don't care, but I think it should be internally consistent with what's already in law. And I'll add 2 or 4 biennia ago, I have the mental image of Commissioner Bolio testifying on whether or not that section of Title 32 should be repealed if the state were to adopt a separate registry, whether tax was the appropriate place to have a registry. He thought not. So, who knows where we're at on any of that now, but.
Right, and committee, I just didn't want to interrupt on this whole thing. Again, there's several of us who have a lot of experience with this bill and many of us who don't. And I'm hitting the point for myself intellectually and just mentally here where I realize I've said a few times throughout the course of the session, well, this is the way we did it before, and now we're coming back to it. I mean, I just introduced bills that didn't pass, and I'm just curious to know, is that even helpful to you to know that information? Or to know it and then to be able to, as Representative Miller pointed out, to have fresh eyes to remind me that we need to have fresh eyes, because this is all new to you. And it's not just this bill, but it's really, I'm hearing it going, if people keep telling me that this was done by a different group of people, which it was, and I'm coming at it, I think, Ashley, you asked me a question about a particular, you gave me an example, and I was like, oh yeah, well it's in, and it's like, no, it's in this version, not in this version. And so I just want to put that out there. I'm just realizing for myself in my relationship with you, what is it? If I'm driving you crazy by saying things like, well, we did it this way before, so get off my lawn now, I'd really like to be called out on it and reminded that you're all still learning about what these subjects, what this particular bill had in it. You wouldn't have known that from your previous work. So I just want to, I don't know, maybe I'm living in my own world over here, but I'm listening to us, David and I going, I don't know what version it was. It doesn't sound like that there. And I just want to respect the fact that this is really new for you.
But it's helpful to know the conversations that have gone on before. For me, anyway.
I just don't want it to be an assumption that it's settled.
Yeah.
No, I'm comfortable too saying if there's something like, well, no, I'm comfortable speaking up if I don't.
Yeah, because if I keep saying that, just really ask the questions or bring up the points as they appear to you. Because
I will.
there are going to be days where I'm not as valid witness as I could be. I always try to bring this information forward in an even way that that there was opposition there. But if I start going into, yes, David, thank you for jogging my memory, and oh my God, this was horrible, but it took forever, and the reasons that we did this was because of this and that and the other thing, that's like, that may not be useful.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I think it's always possible to get right into the weeds of something. And I think sometimes it can be good to just have like a 30,000 foot conversation where we're sort of like, what is the thing that we think, this group of people thinks that, a rental registry of some sort might accomplish? Like, what are the goals that we would want to come out of that? Because some of us, might say, to me, there is no option. I don't like rental registry. I'd say, personally, I would say, I'm skeptical of registries, but I really want to be able to parse short-term and long-term rental data so that we have the opportunity to, that would be like kind of my 30,000 foot view that might be the lens that I bring into this work with is, can we just have a registry where we make all the short-term rental? You know, that's just like an idea, but that would be kind of like, maybe how, you know, I think sometimes maybe not always David here because it's less of the close reading, but to orient where our group's at in terms of like what are our shared goals that kind of, because at a certain point you got to get right into the weeds, but also I think sometimes we can dive into the weeds, especially on a fairly well-worn legislative concept that has had a life over the past biennia. I think sometimes we get right into the weeds and we miss an opportunity to just kind of circle around a little bit at 30,000 feet talking about like what are our aspirations for this type of legislation without saying, you know, what the mechanisms are going to ultimately be. Because sometimes there's some surprising points of agreement or the opposite of that.
Well, and you know, it's not enough. There's a piece of me that says when I'm thinking about how many hours we can spend on any particular bill, on this one passed the House and Senate, a version of it passed the House and Senate the last two bienniums. But nevertheless, there's changes that happened that even I'm not registering. I think my memory. But I don't want that to be taken for granted. You know, there's a part of me that says, oh yeah, well, it passed quickly, so we don't have to spend that much time on it. It's like, no, that's not really true because that's not respecting the work that you all are gonna bring to the outlook that you're all gonna bring to the bill. And I just wanna, I just wanna acknowledge that there are gonna be times, especially when we start getting closer to crossover, that, I mean, I have a phrase, it's like, please think faster.
Yeah.
But that may not always be respectful of, again, where people are. And I don't wanna shut people down. I wanna manage the committee and I wanna be attentive to the time frame that I have in my head and that we have as a committee and as a body to get bills out to a certain place at a certain time. But, you know, I did also hear the voice in my head of a previous witness on the family leave bill who was saying, well, why don't you just do what passed the House 4 years ago? And I'm like, well, times have changed. And that was my mental criticism of hearing that testimony. And I can apply that to my feelings about, I mean, that's kind of what generated why I interrupted. So, it's just a reminder that, you know, this is different than the first month. And we are gonna get into a period of time for the next 3 weeks that are pretty high tests. And I'll leave it there. And I don't wanna squash anybody from having an idea or a thought or a question and asking, just trust me, that's not a good way to build bills. All right, whatever, over. So David, so we were heading towards exemptions.
Yeah, so the registration piece is all the same. It's long-term, short-term, 35 per unit, blah, blah, blah. You don't have to double dip with other programs. Mobile homes, all the same. Where it gets different in this version is the other exception. So on 16 here, you'll see if a unit is not offered to the general public. So the registration and fee requirements don't apply to a unit that an owner provides to another person, whether or not for consideration, if and only to the extent that the owner does not otherwise make the unit available for lease to the general public. And that includes, which is not limited to, but it
For
includes.
consideration could be payment of, it could be an exchange, it could be an agreement.
Well, I mean, you're really getting down into the weeds of whether making a promise counts as consideration. I don't know if anybody has really thought to that level of granularity. I guess the point is, I mean,
The point here, though, is make the unit available for lease to the general public. That's where we started riffing on the exemptions.
yes. So we don't need to dwell on consideration, but basically you're giving them something of value, right? however that manifests. So that includes housing provided to a member of the owner's family or personal acquaintances, housing provided to a person who is not related to a member of the owner's household and who occupies the housing as part of a nonprofit home sharing program, and housing provided to a person who provides personal care to the owner or a member of the owner's household. Those are examples that are included among whatever exceptions are there, but the general public is the sort of the 1 and the 0 there. For 4, housing as a benefit of farm employment, the registration fee requirements do not apply to a unit of housing that is provided as a benefit of farm employment. So they're just not included, those units.
And there's another version of this bill, I think it was either in 210, I think it was in 210,
Right.
that included camps. It had more exemptions added on to that as well.
That's true. I mean, that is true. So that's right.
So David and I.
79 version.
David and I will compile, I think we'll talk over the weekend and try to compile some of the greatest hits from the other sections that we did not put into this, the bill is introduced this year. But those were examples and those were the kinds of conversations that we had. Like what should be, I think this speaks a little bit, Representative Bartley, to your example. And it was the result, the language was the result of these kinds of conversations.
And I just want to check my understanding that farm housing is a distinct category because farm employment is a different category. So this would not apply to other employer-owned housing.
Right.
Correct?
Yeah, that is construed to be not necessarily a full landlord-tenant relationship because it's part of your compensation for your employment, but there still are some of the protections and duties are applicable, not all, but some from Chapter 137. And we can look at that in more detail, but it is a different category of housing than a long-term rental.
But when you think of coming off of this bill, talking about the stuff that we've heard already in testimony about should businesses be building apartments, housing for their employees. It isn't an exact fit, but this is the concept that you have to bring up and think about. Is it a benefit of employment to live in that apartment that your company owns? Right, any further questions for David right now? David, thank you. Thank you for
Sure.
finding that.
Thank you, David.
We'll be in contact about this stuff. Ready to take lunch? We'll see you at, what's that? 1 o'clock.
1 o'clock.
Not 1:15.